From the ocean to the vineyards, Sonoma County draws people from all over the world to experience the experience. But the best is in the forests, surrounded by the towering redwoods.
It's almost hard to describe, just a sense of awe.
They're just magical places. There's just a particular kind of quiet that you find in a redwood forest.
It's an ancient forest. They will give awe to the urbanite.
Some are more than 1,000 years old.
Before the logging came in, it was just a dense rainforest of redwood trees.
Before harvest, it's estimated that there were about 2.2 million acres of forest, old growth.
In the early 1800s, this area was clogged with trees.
Here it was called Big Bottom. You can see the bottomland behind me here. This valley was filled with redwoods.
All over the coastal forests, you still see the giant stumps left from the early days of logging. And they are big.
Man, that's over 27 feet. That's a big tree.
The old-timers cut the trees about 10 feet off the ground because the taper on the bottom was too big to go through the mills.
We certainly had some of the biggest trees in the world at that time.
We're talking trees that were in diameter pushing 18 feet, 375 plus feet tall.
Some so big you could build 5 homes from a single tree. And the curious still flock to Santa Rosa to see the famous Church of One Tree. It was built from a single Sonoma County redwood. The redwoods thrive along the California coast, from Monterey to the Oregon border, where heavy winter rains and thick summer fogs nurture these amazing giants.
If it wasn't for the fog, the redwoods really wouldn't be able to survive. California's got this Mediterranean climate where it rains for about 6 months of the year, and then we have a 6-month dry season.
Arthur Dawson is an historical ecologist and says redwoods have adapted to the climate by grabbing water literally out of the air, what he calls the fog drip.
They have needles that are adapted to catch the fog, and then it drips onto the ground, and so the tree actually gathers moisture to itself in that way and waters itself during the summer.
Fog is very, very important to the redwood forest. It ties over from winter to winter, keeps the moisture, keeps them green.
That lush band of timber was a magnet for the loggers, as the gold in the Sierra was attracting the gold miners.
Start with the gold rush. In 1850, with the massive influx of population to the state, there was a huge demand for lumber.
By the 1860s, the logging industry mushroomed up and down the coast. Some of the densest concentrations of trees were in Old Stumptown, now called Guerneville. It was loaded with trees and sawmills.
Within 5 miles here of Guerneville, in a radius of 5 miles, there were 7 mills operating. And they were water powered. Like Sutter's Mill, big wheel through a sluice. Then as technology advanced, putting steam with a blade, a circular blade, it would mesh the teeth. You had an upper blade and a lower blade so you could handle these logs.
The place was buzzing as water and steam-powered mills ripped millions of feet of lumber, helping build the great cities of California. A piece of history almost gone. But a handful of volunteers who look and sound like they are right out of the old days have brought it all back to life.
It's a hidden gem. And going back in time, this place is alive. This is real history.
At the Sturgeon Sawmill outside Sebastopol, California, they're making magic with century-old machines, lots of sweat and muscle, and most important, all that steam.
You can hear it just chug, chug, chug.
Thump, thump, thump.
Bob Sturgeon's grandfather, Wade, built the mill in Coleman Valley, high in California's Coast Range, some 70 miles north of San Francisco. In 1924, it was moved, piece by piece, to its current location.
In those days, you took the mill to where the logs were because we didn't have the trucks that they have today. They tore it down at Coleman Valley, numbered everything.
And they put it on wagons and skids, and they drug it 7 miles inland from the ocean to this location here. They found a piece of land that had the same topography, a creek running by, and they put the mill back together.
And it remained a working mill till 1963, when it was shut down.
My dad was going to call in the scrappers.
Harvey Henningson's father co-owned the mill with Bob's father, Ralph, when they decided to close it.
I begged him not to cut up the steam engines, and he said, if you want it so bad, you can have it.
It nearly all ended for good until one day.
Then we got together 15 years ago and had a big barbecue of everybody that used to work here. 7 of us said, I wonder if this sucker will still run. Finally, we got the biggest air compressor that they made. It was about the size of a Volkswagen bus, and that did a good job, except there was no steam exhaust. It just wasn't the same.
So, in 2006, they brought in a steam boiler, and the rest is, as they say, history.
Oh, it's amazing how much history is here. And the unique thing about this mill is it wasn't something that was built from scraps as a museum. This was actually a working sawmill that was preserved.
Tom Schaefer was just a young kid when his grandfather was running the mill.
It was a great place to grow up, kind of just magical as a kid.
And it's just as magical for kids today. The magic of recreating history. 4 times a year, they open the mill to the public, fire up the boiler, run the steam through the pipes, and blow the signal. The curious pour in by the hundreds. The show is about to begin. But first, a quick lesson. The centerpiece of the mill was built in the 1880s. The Joshua Hendy head rig has 2 circular saws, the lower one 60 inches in diameter, the upper one is 42 inches. The logs are stacked, sorted, and pulled in by the landing man. They call this yarding the logs. The hook he's using is called a becket. Inside, the sawyer controls the chain to the becket, getting the log onto the carriage. He will then push and pull the levers to the carriage, moving it up and down a track.
This is number 1 man in the sawmill.
And the sawyer is the man on the stick that makes the carriage go back and forth.
He's also in charge of getting the log into position for the block setter.
On the carriage is the block setter.
His job is to make sure the log is properly secured to the carriage.
He hammers the stakes, called dogs, into the backside of the log to lock it into place.
Why do they call them dogs?
Because they bite the log like a dog, I think.
It's called dog in the log.
Dog in the log bites the log and holds it.
And to advance the log into the saw so that you can make 2x or 4x or 6x lumber.
The sawyer signals the block setter using sign language.
Really a concert between the block setter and the sawyer. You'll notice that they're mostly doing things like this instead of yelling at each other because you can't hear each other in the mill.
With an all clear, the sawyer gets the carriage rolling, feeding the log into the head rig. On the other side of the blade, the off-bearers pull down the large slabs. Back and forth and back and forth, a steady stream of feeding logs into the teeth of the blades. Now comes the heavy lifting as the off-bearers pull the slabs away from the log. Using leverage and just pure muscle, the off-bearers feed the slabs into the edger saw. They can preset several blades, getting different widths. It rips just like butter. An assembly line of workers push and pull and manhandle the lumber down the line in choreographed moves.
The guys running around and doing their jobs, and it's amazing. It's like watching a ballet. They all know exactly what to do.
The lumber is pushed down the line to the trim saw, cut into certain lengths, and moved into the yard. The lumber is then sent through this old planer. With belts flying, it smooths the finish the old way. It all makes for quite a show, but what really makes the place special can be found under the sawmill. Down here, a diesel-powered boiler is making tons and tons of steam.
You take a gallon of water and it'll expand 11,000 times. And you put that in a vessel and build pressure. As you release it, it expands, and that's what gives it its power.
The building is just bleeding steam. Everywhere you look. From the boiler, it feeds down the line past these funny-looking machines.
That is the governor that controls the speed. That's probably the #1 asked question is, what's that spinny thing on top?
Past the governor, the steam turns wheels, and the wheels turn belts. And they turn more wheels and more belts. A living 1880s assembly line.
You can hear when you get into a big log, you can hear the engines chug, and you'll see the exhaust by the front deck up there that is really, it's pumping out. You can hear it.
It sounds like nothing else that you've ever heard. It sounds like a human being breathing. It goes
All because of the steam, people come from all over the world to see this mill.
It's really something remarkable to see, well worth traveling across the country for.
Such a beautiful thing to see that this still exists and it's being, kept up by all these people that really love running the thing.
Sturgeons uses only donated trees removed from construction sites or landowners that needed a few trees removed. This living museum has captured in great detail the sights and sounds of the old redwood mills of the 1880s. One of the earliest mills in California was built in Glen Ellen in 1839. Back then, work would begin in the spring as levels in flooded rivers and creeks came down. Crews in the forest would bring down the big trees one at a time, slow, dangerous work.
I do admire the amount of work and labor that went into it, and it would take 2 guys a week to cut down a redwood tree.
The big ones were marked at the bottom of each section, showing how many board feet was in that log. Oxen would drag the trees to mills like the Gurn and Heald Mill in Guerneville. Wagons would then take the finished lumber to Santa Rosa and places beyond.
And they would start out, whether it was by oxen, mule, or horse, and they would haul them out, and sometimes it would take them 2 days to go from here to Santa Rosa, which is a distance of about 20 miles.
In Guerneville, like small towns all over the American West, it changed overnight with the arrival of the first train in 1877.
And that was a big celebration. The train came steaming in. And blowing its whistle like crazy. And the mills are just blowing the whistles in return. It was a tremendous event, and they were hauling out 14, 15, up to 20 cars of lumber out of here every day.
Much of this lumber helped build San Francisco and rebuild it again after the 1906 earthquake. Towns like Monterey, Occidental, and Guerneville boomed. But the last of the trains that ran as far as Duncan Mills were pulled out in the 1930s. Old rail cars sit quietly now, just a shallow reminder of the past. Now it's just tourists coming to see the famous trees and the Russian River. They pour into Armstrong Grove to walk among some of the last old-growth trees. The Grove, a state park now, was saved by John Armstrong in the 1870s. The Parson Jones tree, one of the ancient ones, started life more than 1,000 years before the birth of the United States. History is captured in the tree rings. a 1,000-year-old tree that had already lived 5 centuries when Shakespeare wrote Romeo and Juliet. Modern artists are inventing stunning work from the old trees of the forest.
We make outdoor furniture, indoor furniture, do a lot of slab sales, redwood, cypress, walnut, red elm, bay laurel, which is a local favorite.
Chris Munsterman crafts wood products gleaned from the scraps of the old trees.
There's a lot of dead and down trees. The old growth is actually, for a time I couldn't find any, now that's all I have. Some people are just in awe of the fact that it's a slice of tree.
Just a handful of modern mills remain in the redwood region. Bruce Berry's father started Berry's Sawmill near Cazadero in 1941.
We have never done a clear cut.
His father was one of the early loggers to adopt a modern approach to forestry.
He always felt that as long as you left enough trees in there for your ecosystem to survive and thrive, and it was good for the forest floor to thin it out and release the trees so they're not so close together.
But these days, regulations are crippling many small mills.
Some of it just strangles a business. The biggest thing is environmental stuff. It's just been merciless.
Our mission is to protect and restore redwood forests.
Paul Ringgold is Chief Program Officer for Save the Redwoods League. For nearly a century, the League has been buying up chunks of the remaining old-growth forests.
One tool that we use is acquisition of land to transfer into permanent protection.
The League helped save the grove of the old trees outside Occidental. These 33 acres on private land were on the verge of being harvested when the League and other groups stepped in to save the rare ridgetop old-growth forest.
It is a very unique forest.
He says saving the redwoods is more urgent than ever.
The canopy is like a huge carbon sponge.
New studies show the old trees cleanse the air of carbon dioxide in a dramatic way.
They absorb incredible amounts of carbon. Redwood forests store per acre more carbon than any other ecosystem on the planet. More than tropical rainforests, more than coral reefs. They're a huge, huge carbon sink.
We're growing way more than we're cutting.
But on the Redwood Coast, the controversy continues. And many say without more cutting and some thinning of the forests, a disaster looms.
It's not healthy if you don't thin it out because you have all kinds of undergrowth, and when you have a forest fire, it's like disaster.
If logging is done correctly, it actually can be good for the forest because it opens things up. Forest can get overcrowded.
Berry's mill once ran full-time, but Bruce Berry says he can only get enough trees now to operate 1 day a month on average. Still, with computers, electricity, modern saws and large trucks, it's a lot different than those early days of the Sonoma mills. That's what's so special about Sturgeons, giving us a chance to experience the past in all its gritty glory. So on these steam-up weekends, when the volunteers fire up the mill, history buffs pour in.
If that didn't work,
they're paired with docents to tour the grounds. It's not just the main mill they love. A big hit is the steam donkey.
Ready? Two hands, pull it hard.
In the old days, these would be dragged into the forest to process the logs on the spot.
So they would down the logs, they'd buck them up, and then they drag these across the skid road. They'd stretch a cable out, sometimes a half-mile long, and they would just literally drag it through the forest.
That we are working on restoring.
The docents take visitors right into the guts of the mill, just inches from all the action. They all love the big saw. Faces, young and old, are keyed in on the action. The noise, the flying sawdust, the smells, everything gets a reaction.
I'm going to come again tomorrow, and I can't wait to show some more friends. I'm astounded.
It's like stepping back in time. And I can't believe that it looks the way that it does even today.
This is what America was built on.
And they came all the way from Truckee.
It really is a place kids adore.
Oh, very special for kids.
and they had a wonderful time today. It was very educational.
We loved it. What did you think about it?
I like when they chop the wood.
Yeah.
What was your favorite thing that you saw?
I think the horse thing.
The donkey?
Yeah, the
You like the donkey, the steam donkey?
Kids really get a kick out of watching how they sharpen the big saw blades, slow grinding one tooth at a time. On this day, the youngest visitor was 3-month-old Sophia, but the ages are all over the map, and it's an especially big event for fathers.
On Father's Day, we get so many people here because they have made it a tradition to talk to their fathers.
4 times a year, the volunteers host school kids from all over the region. Some have never seen the redwoods before.
And these guys came off the bus here, they couldn't believe this place. They never seen anything like it, the kids. They just was at awe.
One of the kids I know, I heard her say, I didn't realize they had these big trees like this around here anymore. So, they just don't see it.
But there's one thing they won't show the kids or the adults: how the old-timers dealt with the really big logs.
On Sunday afternoons after church, my dad would come out here and blow logs in half because they were too big to get into the mill.
Every tree has a wind check, a stress crack. They would drill for the powder on this crack.
They're boring a hole in this log right here, loading it with black powder. When he set the charge off, it went boom, and the ground shook and the logs just popped right open.
And by the way, they stored the black powder in the office, near the wood stove. On tour days, guests can buy lunch at the mill and hang with the volunteers, all loaded with stories and pride.
We don't really consider it work. We enjoy it. People, they get away from handheld computers and things, and they start enjoying the redwoods, the gardens, and watching machinery work. They're amazed that some of these machines that are 1880s are still working.
The crew and the visitors share a special love of the redwood forest that has captured the imagination of millions of visitors from all over the world.
I love the redwoods, just the size and the tranquility. To me, it's a very calming kind of thing, and it's very centering and it's very helpful in putting things in perspective.
For me, having been raised here on the river, I still find tremendous enjoyment just going up here to Armstrong, and I go up there a dozen times a year.
To me, it's almost like going to a church, cathedral. I love it here. It's heaven. I call it paradisio.
It's very serene. It has that timeless sense to it. You feel like you're in the presence of beings that are far older than we are.
First and foremost, I feel calm. And there's a sense of serenity that overcomes me. It's almost a combination of being calm and overwhelmed.
Perhaps the great California writer John Steinbeck said it best: there's a special kind of feel in a redwood forest. That is what is so important about a place like Sturgeon's Mill. It takes us back to another time and pays tribute to these uniquely California trees. 100 years after it was built, the volunteers keep this extraordinary place running to remind us of our heritage. Passing on the tricks of the old ways for a new generation. It's emotional for them, this special place in the hills.
They love this place, and us all of us on the crew even love it more.
It's just living history.
It moves and vibrates.
Everything is an original piece of history.
You'll never find this in any other place.
It's just like we turned the page back in the 1850s.
There is much pride from the men and women who have saved this classic piece of California history. You can bet Wade Sturgeon would be thrilled to see his mill in the redwoods alive again.